My name is Ava Mercer. I'm 27, and the night my mother told me to start paying rent or get out, she said it with 2 juice boxes in one hand, my sister's diaper bag hanging off her wrist, and my sister's twin boys smearing peanut butter into the couch I'd cleaned an hour earlier. "If you want to live here," she said, loud enough for everyone in the kitchen to hear, "you'll have to start contributing like an adult." I just stood there in my scrubs, fresh off a 12-hour overnight shift at an emergency animal hospital, staring at the woman who had spent the last 4 years treating me like live-in childcare with a pulse. My sister laughed from the island and said, "Honestly, Mom should have charged you sooner. You act like watching the boys is some huge sacrifice." That was the moment something inside me went still. Not angry, not even hurt, just still. Because it hit me all at once that they didn't see me as a daughter or a sister or even a person with a life. I was the backup plan. The unpaid sitter? The one who never said no. So I smiled, set my keys on the counter, walked to the hall closet, pulled out the duffel bag I'd packed 2 months earlier just in case I ever found the nerve, and zipped it shut in front of them. My mother folded her arms like she expected me to crack. My sister rolled her eyes and told the twins to say bye to Aunt Ava, like I'd be back before dinner. I looked at all of them and thought, if I disappeared tonight, would they miss me or just the work I did? Before I tell you what happened after I drove off, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. I didn't cry when I left. That surprises people when I tell this story, because they expect some dramatic breakdown in the driveway, some shaking hands moment where I second-guessed myself and stared back at the house like I was leaving part of my heart behind. I didn't. I was too exhausted to cry and too relieved to mourn. The truth is, I had already left that house in pieces long before I carried out that duffel bag. Every overnight shift I worked at Low Country Emergency Vet had become its own form of escape. I'd spend 12 hours dealing with panicked pet owners, blood work, ringing phones, emergency intakes, and the steady adrenaline that came with helping people on the worst night of their week. Then I'd drive home at sunrise, peel off my scrubs, and walk into a house that somehow felt louder than the hospital. There was always something waiting for me there. Sticky counters, cartoon theme songs blaring from the television, the twins crying over mismatched cups, my mother asking if I could just keep an eye on them for a few hours, which was code for surrendering my entire day. My older sister would drop them off with a kiss on their foreheads and some breezy excuse about a closing, a networking brunch, a last-minute client tour, or needing one uninterrupted afternoon to breathe. Nobody ever seemed to notice that I needed that too. In that house, my exhaustion was treated like an inconvenience, not a fact. My sleep was optional, my schedule was negotiable, my body was always assumed available. So when I pulled into a roadside motel 6 exits away and paid for 3 nights up front with money I had been secretly saving, I didn't feel reckless. I felt sane. I felt like someone who had finally pulled the fire alarm in a building that had been quietly burning for years. I checked in under my own name, carried my duffel bag to a room with faded curtains and an air conditioner that rattled like loose coins, and locked the door behind me. Then I did the first truly selfish thing I had done in years. I turned my phone face down, ordered hot waffles and coffee from room service, took a shower so long the mirror disappeared in steam, and crawled into bed while the sun was still up. Nobody knocked. Nobody shouted my name from the hall. Nobody handed me a diaper, a snack cup, a missing sock, or a problem they expected me to solve before I slept. I woke up 7 hours later in total silence and just lay there for a full minute, staring at the ceiling like I had landed on another planet. Even the silence felt expensive, like something I hadn't realized I'd been denied. I got dressed slowly, drove to a cafe nearby, and bought myself an overpriced brown sugar espresso and a warm blueberry muffin I didn't have to split with anyone. Then I sat in my car with the windows cracked, sunlight hitting the steering wheel, and started scrolling through apartment listings. Charleston looked different when I wasn't racing between work and obligation. The streets looked wider. The sky looked cleaner. The whole city seemed to exist in layers I had never had time to notice. I found myself imagining simple things that felt almost embarrassingly luxurious. A kitchen where I could leave one clean mug in the sink and know it would still be there when I came back. A bathroom without bath toys scattered underfoot. A morning where I could sleep without guilt. An evening where I could light a candle and read instead of reheating dinosaur nuggets for children who weren't mine. By the second day, I found a tiny upstairs apartment over a florist shop in West Ashley. It had chipped white trim, old hardwood floors, creaky steps, and a narrow balcony barely big enough for 2 chairs and a plant. But the second I stepped inside, I knew. It smelled like fresh paint, lilies from the shop downstairs, and possibility. The leasing manager kept apologizing for the age of the cabinets and the small closet, but I barely heard her. All I could think was that every inch of that apartment belonged to no one's emergency but mine. I signed the lease before fear could catch up to me. That night, I sat cross-legged on the floor with Thai takeout in my lap, surrounded by 2 bags of essentials, a lamp in a cardboard box, and more peace than I had felt in years. It was terrifying in its own way, of course. Freedom always is when you've been trained to associate love with obligation. But underneath the fear was a steady pulse of relief that wouldn't go away. Nobody knew where I was, unless I wanted them to. Nobody could open the door and assign me a role. Nobody could tell me that being tired was selfish, or that saying no meant I didn't care. And still, underneath all that peace, a question flickered at the edge of my mind like a pilot light that refused to go out. Was I really selfish for finally choosing myself? Or had they simply trained me to believe that freedom was a betrayal? The first 3 days, I ignored every message, not because I was strong, but because I knew exactly how it would start. First guilt, then pressure, then some version of family helps family spoken by the same people who only used that sentence when they needed labor. On day 4, curiosity got the better of me. I unlocked my phone and found 46 texts, 12 missed calls, and 1 voice note from my mother marked urgent. My sister had sent messages too, but hers looked different. My mother's were frantic and manipulative in alternating waves. Where are you? This is childish. The boys are confused. I need you to call me. You made your point. My sisters were sharper. Are you seriously punishing the twins because you're mad at Mom? Grow up. I listened to the voice note while sitting on the bare floor of my apartment with a boxed lamp beside me. My mother sounded breathless, angry. Not worried for me, I noticed. Worried for herself. You can't just vanish after everything I've done for you, she said. I had to cancel a doctor's appointment because Brielle couldn't get there in time, and the boys were a disaster all morning. Do you know how humiliating it is to tell people my own daughter abandoned her family? I actually laughed at that. Abandoned. As if I had walked out on children I birthed, bills I created, promises I made. I typed 1 sentence back. I did not abandon anyone. I moved out. 10 seconds later, my phone lit up with a video call from my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered. The screen opened to pure chaos. 1 twin was crying in the background. The TV was screaming some cartoon theme song. My mother's hair was half pinned up, and behind her I could see laundry spilling from baskets and dishes stacked in the sink. Then my sister's face shoved into frame. Look what you did, she snapped, swinging the phone so I could see the living room. This house is a wreck. Mom had to miss work yesterday because of you. Because of me. Not because a 32-year-old woman kept using her mother and sister as unpaid childcare. Not because my mother had spent years normalizing that arrangement, because of me. I stared at the screen and something cold settled into place. No, I said. This is what the house looks like when I stop holding it together. My sister blinked like she hadn't expected resistance. My mother cut in fast, voice trembling into full-blown martyrdom. You are killing me with this, Ava. You know I can't manage those boys alone. Brielle has clients. I have responsibilities. We all depended on you. There it was. Not we love you. Not we miss you. We depended on you. I asked the question I should have asked years earlier. Did either of you ever care whether I was sleeping, eating, working, or was I just useful? Neither of them answered. My sister scoffed. My mother started crying, and that silence told me everything. When family begs you to come back, do they miss you, or just the role you played? I ended the call before they could turn it into my fault again. 5 minutes later, I opened every shared login, every calendar, every school contact form, every grocery delivery account, every streaming profile, every emergency pickup authorization that still had my name attached, because I had been the one managing their lives in ways they barely understood. I didn't make a scene. I made a correction. I removed my name from all of it. Then I emailed the after-school program the twins attended twice a week and updated my emergency contact status from authorized pickup to unavailable. One move, clean and quiet. If I was no longer family enough to live there without paying rent, then I was no longer family enough to be their unpaid infrastructure either. The week after that was the first week I felt my spine come back. I stopped checking my phone every hour. I stopped jumping every time it buzzed. I bought a real comforter, 2 mismatched coffee mugs, and a narrow bookshelf from a thrift store that smelled like cedar, old paper, and dust warmed by the sun. I found a second-hand armchair with faded green fabric and set it by the balcony door like I had always lived there. I learned the rhythm of my new block in the quiet, observant way people do when their nervous systems are finally settling down. At 9 each morning, the florist downstairs hosed off the sidewalk and arranged buckets of hydrangeas and lilies outside the shop. Around 10, a retired man across the street walked a grumpy bulldog in bright red boots. The bakery on the corner sold out of peach scones by 10:30, and if I went just after noon, the girl behind the counter would slip me an extra cookie because she recognized me from my night shift scrubs. It all felt absurdly tender, the kind of ordinary life I had never been allowed to build because I had always been too busy maintaining someone else's. I also started saying yes to things I used to dismiss automatically. A vet tech from work had spent months begging me to join her weekend ceramics class, and I always said I couldn't, because family stuff was apparently supposed to explain away any dream small enough to be sacrificed. This time, I went. I sat at a clay wheel in an oversized t-shirt with my hair twisted up, laughing as my first bowl collapsed into something ugly and lopsided under my hands. The instructor told me not to fight the clay so hard. "Center it first," she said, pressing her fingers over mine for one steady second. "If your hands are tense, it'll wobble every time." I don't know why that line hit me so hard, but it did. Because that was my life, wasn't it? Years of trying to hold shape under pressure while everything around me spun too fast. Years of wobbling because I had never been allowed to center myself first. At work, people noticed the difference before I fully did. I stopped making small mistakes from exhaustion. I stopped zoning out in the break room with vending machine coffee in my hand. I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. One of the doctors told me I looked awake for the first time in a year, and I nearly cried right there by the medication cabinet because I hadn't realized how obvious my burnout had been to everyone except me. A few days later, the hospital manager asked if I wanted to start training for lead overnight coordinator, a modest promotion with slightly better pay, more responsibility, and steadier hours. A month earlier, I would have said no automatically because my schedule had never belonged to me long enough to plan a future. This time, I said yes, before the old guilt could speak. That same Thursday, after a long but manageable shift, my friend Lena dragged me to a neighborhood street fair near the marina. I almost said no out of habit, then caught myself. There was live music, greasy food trucks, kids running under strings of lights, and one ridiculous booth hosting a pet costume contest for charity. Lena convinced me to enter a 3-legged beagle from the clinic who was temporarily staying with one of our techs. He wore a tiny shark fin harness and looked deeply offended by the attention, which only made the crowd love him more. When he somehow won us a $50 gift card to a seafood place on King Street, Lena screamed like we had just hit the lottery, and I laughed so hard my sides hurt. It sounds like such a small thing. Maybe it is. But after years of being told my wants were extra, dramatic, selfish, or inconvenient, those tiny moments felt like proof that my life could contain joy that wasn't borrowed, stolen, or squeezed into the edges of somebody else's needs. The old version of me had been reduced to function: wake up, work, babysit, clean, repeat. This newer version was still exhausted sometimes, still untangling guilt from love, still learning how to rest without apology. But she existed outside service. That mattered more than I knew how to say. Of course, the messages didn't stop. My mother sent long paragraphs swinging between guilt and nostalgia, telling me the house felt empty without me while conveniently leaving out that what she missed most was help. My sister sent clipped updates clearly designed to trigger panic. Mason had a meltdown at pickup. Miles bit another child. Mom's blood pressure is up. Hope your apartment is worth it. The thing about people who depend on your overfunctioning is that once you stop rescuing them, they start calling your boundaries cruelty. They describe your absence like an attack because they can't stand being left alone with responsibilities they always planned to hand back to you. But none of their escalating crises changed the truth. They had built an entire system around my unpaid sacrifice and called it closeness. They had confused my compliance with love. They had mistaken my silence for agreement. Saturday night, I sat on my tiny balcony with takeout balanced on my knee, a cheap standing lamp glowing through the sliding door behind me, and the humid Charleston air lifting my hair off my shoulders. Somewhere below, the florist was locking up for the night. A couple was laughing as they walked down the sidewalk. A train sounded in the distance, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel like I was on standby for someone else's emergency. I asked myself the question no one in my family had ever bothered to ask me. Who might I become if I stopped living as their solution? This time, the answer didn't scare me. It excited me. Because sometimes, the moment you stop overfunctioning for everyone else is the exact moment you finally meet the person you were supposed to be all along. A week after I removed my name from everything, my sister texted. Not a paragraph, not a guilt trip. 3 words: call me now. I almost ignored it. Then my phone started ringing before I could set it down. The second I answered, she was already screaming. What the hell did you do? There was traffic noise behind her and one of the twins wailing so hard he sounded hoarse. Did you take yourself off the school forms? Did you tell aftercare they couldn't release the boys to you anymore? I leaned back against my kitchen counter and closed my eyes. So this was it. The one move. The one that finally hit where it hurt. Yes, I said, because I moved out. She made a strangled sound. Mom had a dental appointment and I had a closing across town. Aftercare refused to let me send my assistant because apparently only listed adults can pick them up. And your name was always the backup. We got charged late fees, Ava. They almost called CPS. She said the last 3 letters like I had summoned social services myself out of spite. You humiliated me. I let that hang there. Then I asked very quietly, did you ever think it was humiliating for me to come home from overnight shifts and raise your children for free? Silence. Then outrage because shame in people like my sister usually reappeared wearing anger. "They're your nephews, and you're their mother." She started shouting again, something about how real families show up, how I knew she was building her real estate brand, how Mom was overwhelmed, how I could have warned them. Warned them? I had spent years warning them every time I said I was tired, every time I asked for sleep, every time I tried to make plans and got handed a diaper bag instead. They just never believed I would leave. My mother got on the line next, crying so hard she could barely breathe. "Why would you do this without telling me?" she asked. "Because every time I told you I needed a life, you laughed," I said. "Because when you told me to pay rent or leave, what you really meant was, keep serving this house, or stop being useful." So I stopped being useful. That landed. I could hear it in the way the line went still. Then came the guilt knives. My mother said she had missed 2 days of work. My sister said one client had gone with another agent because she had to leave a showing early. The twins had been shuffled between neighbors, a sitter they couldn't afford, and one disastrous afternoon at my mother's office. My younger brothers, Cole and Jace, had been forced to help more around the house and were furious at everyone. The whole machine was sputtering now that its hidden engine had been removed. I wish I could tell you I felt nothing. I didn't. I felt grief, anger, vindication, relief. But more than anything, I felt clarity. What was happening to them wasn't punishment I created. It was the bill coming due on years of avoidance. My mother lowered her voice and tried one more tactic. "Just come back for a little while, until things settle down." There was the trap. Temporary. Just help us bridge the gap. Just until. People like that build cages out of temporary favors. I looked around my apartment at my thrift store bookshelf, my plant on the windowsill, my work schedule taped to the fridge, the life I was slowly building with my own 2 hands. "No," I said, "you don't need me to come back. You need to make different choices." My sister cursed at me. My mother sobbed. I ended the call. 10 minutes later, my sister texted again. "Hope this apartment is worth losing your family over." I read it twice and set the phone down. The truth was harder than what she wrote. I hadn't lost my family that week. I had discovered the version of family they had always been when I was no longer willing to pay for belonging with my labor. The fallout kept rolling. My mother's church friends started calling, which told me exactly how the story was being told. In her version, I had run off in a selfish phase and left everyone scrambling. In the real version, she had spent years outsourcing parenting and childcare onto the daughter least likely to protest, then panicked when that daughter finally enforced a boundary. A family friend named Denise left me a voicemail so sugary it made my teeth ache, saying my mother was under terrible strain, and that as women, we sometimes had to carry more than our share for the people we love. That sentence used to work on me. This time, it made me furious. Why was the burden always assigned to the most compliant woman in the room? Why was my sister's career treated as important, my mother's stress treated as sacred, and my sleep, income, and future treated as flexible? A few days later, Cole called me from the back porch of the house. He sounded embarrassed to be the messenger. He told me my mother had gotten written up at work after leaving early too often. My sister and my mother were barely speaking except to fight. The twins had started acting out because their schedule kept changing. Jace had forgotten a project at home and gotten detention because nobody's organized anymore. Then Cole said the line that stayed with me. "I didn't realize how much you did until you stopped." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was the first honest thing anyone in that house had said. I thanked him and told him none of this was his job to fix. The next weekend, my mother showed up at the vet hospital parking lot when my shift ended. I knew it was her car before she rolled down the window. She looked older than she had 2 weeks earlier, not in a theatrical way, just worn down by consequences she couldn't charm or guilt away. She asked if we could talk. I stayed standing. She started with the same lines. She had been stressed. She hadn't meant it that way. I had overreacted. Nobody expected this. Then, for the first time, something cracked. I really did think you'd come back the same day, she admitted. You always do. That almost broke me because it was so honest and so cruel at the same time. She had counted on my pattern more than she valued my pain. That's exactly the problem, I said. You all built your lives around the assumption that I'd absorb whatever was dumped on me. Her eyes filled immediately. We're family. Family isn't a permission slip, I said. It's not a system where one person disappears so everyone else can stay comfortable. She asked whether I hated them. I said no. Hate would have been simpler. What I felt was harder. I loved them enough to stop helping in the one way that kept all of us broken. She tried one last guilt push and told me Brielle was drowning, that the boys needed stability, that maybe I could at least take weekends again. There it was. Even in apology, they were negotiating access to my labor. No, I said again. If Brielle needs childcare, she can pay for it. If you need help, ask for help without acting like I owe you my life. She looked stunned, maybe because no one in our family had ever spoken that clearly before. I drove home shaking, but not from doubt. From release. That night, I signed the paperwork for my promotion at work. 2 days later, I bought a used sofa from a coworker and carried it up the stairs with help from Lena and her husband. We ate pizza on moving blankets and laughed until midnight. My old life had trained me to think support only came with strings. That week taught me otherwise. Real support does not demand your erasure. Real love does not require exhaustion as proof. And if people only collapse when you stop overextending for them, then maybe your leaving isn't betrayal. Maybe it's the first honest thing that's happened in that family in years. 3 weeks later, my sister asked to meet. Not text war meet. Not ambush at mom's house meet. A real meeting, at a coffee shop halfway between her office and my apartment. I almost said no. Then, curiosity won. When I walked in, she was already there. No makeup, hair in a rushed knot, staring into a coffee she hadn't touched. She looked like someone who had been forced to meet herself and didn't like the introduction. The first thing she said was, "I hate that you were right." I sat down slowly. She told me she had lost 2 clients in 10 days because her schedule was so unstable. She and Mom had fought so hard one night that the twins heard everything and started crying. Paid childcare in Charleston was more expensive than she had ever bothered to learn because she had never needed to learn it while I existed. Mom's job had cut her hours after too many disruptions. The boys were exhausted from being bounced around. Nothing in her voice sounded like performance. It sounded like someone scraping truth out of her own throat. Then she said, "I didn't realize Mom treated you like that because I benefited from it." That was the closest thing to accountability I had ever heard from her. Not enough to erase anything. Enough to matter. I asked whether she wanted forgiveness or a free sitter. She actually laughed once, tired and bitter. "That answer used to be the same thing for me," she said. "Now I know it's not." We talked for nearly an hour. She admitted Mom used to call me the reliable one, like it was praise, when really it meant easiest to use. She admitted she used to dump the twins there because she knew I'd handle it, and that somewhere along the way she stopped seeing how insane that was. Then she slid something across the table. A check. Not huge, but real. For all the groceries, school fees, and random stuff you covered over the last year when I said I'd pay you back. I stared at it. I didn't need the amount. I needed what it meant. An acknowledgement that my labor had value. I took it. Not because it balanced the scales. It never could. But because refusing it would have been the old me, the version trained to prove love by swallowing loss. Later that weekend, I agreed to stop by the house for 30 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the consequences before I opened the car door. The yard was untrimmed. Toys were scattered everywhere. Through the front window, I could see dishes in the sink and unfolded laundry on the sofa. Not disaster movie chaos. Just the ordinary, grinding mess that appears when the invisible worker is gone and everyone else is still learning how to function. My mother opened the door and burst into tears on sight. Not cinematic tears, tired ones. She hugged me, and I didn't hug back right away. Inside, Cole was making boxed mac and cheese while Jace hunted for a permission slip, and one twin was coloring on construction paper taped to the table because apparently that was the only way to keep him still. It was messy, loud, imperfect. It was also honest in a way the old house had never been. No one could pretend anymore that this place ran itself. My mother asked if we could talk privately. In the kitchen, she said she was sorry. Not, "I'm sorry you felt that way." Not, "I'm sorry, but I was stressed." Just sorry. She told me she had been ashamed of how much she leaned on me, so she had disguised it as family duty instead. She said losing control of the household had forced her to see that I had been carrying far more than she ever admitted. Then she said the sentence I think she had been avoiding all her life. "I was wrong to make your usefulness your place in this family." I wish I could say that instantly healed everything. It didn't. Some wounds don't close because the truth finally gets spoken. But it mattered. I looked around that kitchen where I had once packed lunches half asleep after night shifts, where I had bounced crying twins on one hip while signing school forms with the other hand, where I had been told to pay rent like my labor counted for nothing, and I felt something calm settle over me. "You taught me something important," I said. "Never let people confuse access with love. Never let them call dependence devotion. And never keep proving your value to people who only notice it when it's gone." My mother cried harder. My sister stood in the doorway listening, silent for once. I stayed exactly 28 minutes. On the way out, one of the twins ran up and hugged my leg, and I bent down and kissed the top of his head because none of this had ever been his fault. At the door, my mother asked if I'd come for Sunday dinner the next week. Not to help, not to watch anyone, just dinner. I told her maybe. That was another new thing I had learned. Love doesn't have to sound like yes on demand. Sometimes love sounds like maybe, and that has to be enough. When I got back to my apartment, I sat on my balcony while the florist downstairs locked up for the evening, and I thought about the version of me who once believed leaving would destroy my family. It didn't. It forced them to face themselves. And it saved me. The biggest lesson I took from all of it is this: sometimes walking away is not selfishness. Sometimes it's education. It teaches the people around you what your labor was really worth. It teaches you that your identity cannot be built entirely out of sacrifice. And it teaches everyone involved that love without respect is just obligation wearing a softer face. So let me ask you this. If your family only noticed your value after you left, would you go back the same way you were before? Or would you finally choose the version of yourself that no longer needs to earn a seat at the table?